Imagine yourself escaping to a secluded cabin deep in the forests of Idaho, seeking peace and relief from the chaotic city life. But what if, as night falls, a strange and disturbing sound starts knocking rhythmically and methodically at the front door? Without rational explanation and no evidence at dawn, would you be prepared to face the true terror of the unknown? I am a man in my 30s, accustomed to the bustling city life. My days are filled with endless meetings and nights spent staring at glowing screens. My face reflects the fatigue of an exhausting routine. With pronounced dark circles and a stubbled beard, my shoulders carry the invisible weight of daily stress. When my longtime friend Ricardo suggested an escape to my dad's cabin in Idaho, I saw the perfect opportunity for a getaway. The promise of peace and tranquility in a deep forest was irresistible. I packed some comfortable clothes, canned food, and my favorite sleeping bag. Ricardo, always the enthusiast, brought fishing gear and an old guitar, promising nights of music and laughter. The drive to the cabin was long and quiet. As we left civilization behind, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension growing inside me. The trees along the road seemed taller and denser with each mile. Ricardo tried to cheer me up by telling stories of his latest outdoor adventures, but my mind was occupied with the idea of finally unplugging. We finally arrived. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it. Small, rustic, and cozy. The scent of wood and damp earth filled my nostrils as we stepped out of the car. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional chirping of a distant bird. Ricardo sighed deeply, absorbing the calmness of the place. As we unloaded our things, I couldn't help but notice how the forest seemed to be watching us. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper than they should be. I shook my head, dismissing these thoughts. After all, we were here to relax, not to feed irrational fears. Ricardo, ever practical, suggested a walk to stretch our legs and explore the surroundings before dark. We walked on familiar trails, childhood memories resurfacing with every step. The old wooden bridge over the creek was still there, creaking under our feet. The sound of the flowing water was hypnotizing, and for a moment, I managed to forget the city stress. Ricardo was excited, planning our itinerary for the coming days: fishing, longer hikes, maybe even a dip in the lake. Night fell quickly and we retreated inside the cabin. The wooden walls enveloped us in a comforting embrace, and soon we were laughing and sharing fireside stories. Ricardo gently strummed the guitar, and the tranquil melody blended with the crackling fire. For a moment, I completely forgot about the world outside and all the worries I had brought with me. Little did I know that this night would become one of those true scary stories that would haunt my dreams for years to come. As the night progressed, our initial enthusiasm began to give way to fatigue. We decided to turn into the bunk beds upstairs, continuing our conversation in softer tones. The silence of the eerie forest seemed to amplify every whispered word. Ricardo spoke about how nature teaches us to be patient and appreciate the little moments, but my mind was starting to wander, exhausted from the long journey. It was almost midnight when we finally turned off the lantern. The darkness that enveloped us was absolute, broken only by the faint moonbeams sneaking through the cracks in the windows. I was about to drift off to sleep when I heard something, a soft sound, almost imperceptible, as if something was scraping against the front door. My entire body tensed up. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Ricardo. His affirmative response made my heart race. Before we could rationalize the sound, another noise echoed through the cabin firm, rhythmic knocks on the door. They weren't the desperate knocks of someone seeking help, nor the casual rapping of a visitor. They were deliberate knocks, almost methodical. Fear began to settle in my chest. We were miles away from civilization in the middle of nowhere. Who or what could be on the other side of that door? Ricardo, trying to keep calm, suggested it could be some curious animal, but we both knew that didn't make sense. The knocks continued, relentless. My friend and I remained frozen in our bunks, unable to move or speak. The deep forest outside, which had once seemed like a sanctuary, now transformed into a prison of shadows and unexplainable sounds. The hours crawled by like an eternity. The knocks on the door persisted, intermittent, sometimes stopping for long minutes only to resume with renewed intensity. Each pause brought a mix of relief and renewed terror, for we knew the silence was only temporary. My mind raced, searching for rational explanations. A lost animal? A disoriented hunter? But no explanation seemed satisfactory. Animals don't knock on doors with such persistence, and any human would have identified themselves or asked for help. Fear kept us awake and alert. Every creak of the wood, every sigh of the wind in the trees, became a potential new threat. The cabin, which had always been a refuge, now felt fragile and exposed. Ricardo muttered low prayers, an old habit he had abandoned, but now seemed to be the only source of comfort. In a moment of courage, or perhaps sheer desperation, I decided to look out the window. With my heart pounding in my chest, I silently crawled to the small opening. What I saw, or rather, what I didn't see, sent shivers down my spine. There was nothing out there, no shadowy figure, no animal, nothing but the impenetrable darkness of the forest. And yet the knocks continued, as if coming from an invisible being. I returned to my bunk trembling. The horror stories we used to share around the campfire seemed childish compared to this terrifying experience. This was a true scary story, lived in real time, without the assurance of a guaranteed happy ending. The night seemed endless. Every minute stretched into hours, filled only by the sound of the knocks and our quickened breathing. The survival horror we felt was primitive, visceral. We were trapped in our own nighttime story, unable to escape or confront whatever lay on the other side of that door. The first rays of sunlight were greeted with indescribable relief. The knocks had ceased a few hours before dawn, but fear kept us immobile until daylight finally streamed through the windows. Ricardo and I looked at each other, our faces mirroring the same exhausted terror. With trembling legs, we descended the stairs. Each step toward the front door was an act of courage. When we finally opened it, we were greeted only by the familiar sight of the morning forest. There were no footprints, no marks on the wood, no visible sign of the nocturnal visitor. The forest seemed peaceful, almost mocking our nighttime terror. We searched the cabin's surroundings but found nothing out of the ordinary. As we packed our things to leave, earlier than planned, we discussed the night's events. No explanation seemed satisfactory. The absence of physical evidence made it all the more disturbing. Ricardo, usually the optimist, was visibly shaken, his confidence rattled by the unexplainable. On the drive back to civilization, the silence between us was heavy. We both knew we had experienced something that defied logic, something that would fit perfectly among the urban legends and scary tales people share, but rarely encounter. That night in the deep forests of Idaho changed us. The fear we felt was real, tangible, even if its cause remains a mystery. Sometimes the scariest spine-chilling stories are those we live through, the ones that leave us with more questions than answers. As the eerie forest faded in the rearview mirror, I knew that although we were leaving that place behind, the memories of that night would stay with us forever. The certainty that there are things we cannot explain, terrors we cannot fully comprehend, would become a part of us. Ricardo and I made a silent pact to never speak of that night again, but we both knew its shadows would follow us, constantly reminding us that the unknown still holds its own secrets. What should have been a peaceful walk along a familiar trail turned into an indescribable nightmare. On a sunny day, my girlfriend and I ventured into the forest, seeking the peace and beauty of nature. But when we ventured off the marked trail, we encountered a disturbing figure atop a rocky formation, a sinister-looking man, bizarrely dressed, whose cold, empty eyes pierced our souls. I never thought that a simple walk could turn into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. It was a typical Saturday, and my girlfriend and I decided to explore a new trail in the forest near our town. The day was pleasant, with the sun filtering through the treetops, creating a play of light and shadow on the leaf-covered ground. We were young and adventurous, always seeking new thrills. I, at 25, worked as a freelance graphic designer, while my girlfriend, 2 years younger, was a biology student. Our shared passion for nature often led us to explore new places, but nothing could prepare us for what we would find in that deep forest. We started our journey enthusiastically, following the well-marked trail. The trees around us seemed to grow denser as we ventured further, their intertwined branches forming a canopy that blocked out more and more of the sunlight. The air became cooler and damper, carrying the scent of earth and decomposing vegetation. After about an hour of hiking, we noticed that the trail was starting to become less defined. The markers that had guided us were now scarce, and we had to rely more on our instincts. My girlfriend, always the more adventurous of the two of us, suggested we venture off the main trail to explore a bit. I hesitated for a moment, but her excitement was contagious, and I eventually agreed. That's when things started to change as we left the trail. The forest seemed to swallow the sound of our footsteps, creating an oppressive silence. The shadows seemed deeper, and a sense of unease began to settle in my chest. I tried to brush off these thoughts, convincing myself that it was just my overactive imagination. Little did I know that this innocent walk was about to turn into one of the most intense, scary stories I would ever experience. As we ventured deeper into the dense forest, the sense of disorientation grew. The trees seemed identical in every direction, and the terrain became increasingly steep. My girlfriend, ever the optimist, insisted that we were about to discover something amazing. I couldn't share her enthusiasm. Unease settled in my stomach. After an exhausting 2-hour hike, we spotted a clearing ahead. In the center of it stood a rocky formation, abruptly rising from the surrounding vegetation. My girlfriend exclaimed in surprise and joy, "Look." She pointed. "There's someone up there." Following her gaze, I noticed a solitary figure sitting atop the rock. As we drew closer, we could make out the silhouette more clearly. It appeared to be an old lady, sitting quietly with a sketchbook on her lap. The scene was so unexpected that we couldn't help but make some nervous jokes. "What if it's not an old lady?" I teased. "What if it's some psychopath waiting to attack us?" We laughed, trying to ease the tension that was inexplicably building up. The climb up the rocky formation was steep and challenging. Our muscles protested with each step, and sweat dripped down our foreheads. The anticipation of what we would find at the top mingled with a growing sense of apprehension. The jokes about serial killers and urban legends of haunted forests seemed less funny with each meter we ascended. Finally, we reached the top of the rocky formation. The view was breathtaking. Sheer cliffs dropped down to the distant ocean, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and red. But all of the beauty of the landscape was eclipsed by the shock that awaited us. The figure we'd seen from a distance turned to face us, and my blood ran cold in my veins. It was not an old lady, but a man with a disturbing appearance, wearing a dress and with his hair braided into small ponytails, secured with elastic bands. The man stared at us with empty, cold eyes, his face marked by scars and an expression that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just his unusual appearance that scared me, but the aura of danger that emanated from him. My mind raced, imagining 1,000 terrible scenarios, each worse than the last. Were these the true scary stories people told about encounters in deep forests? I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. "Hello," I said with a voice that I barely recognized as my own. The stranger didn't respond, only staring at us with a penetrating gaze that seemed to pierce our souls. I felt my girlfriend squeeze my hand, her body tense beside me. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. With my heart pounding in my chest, I decided it was time to leave. Without making any sudden movements, I started to back away slowly, pulling my girlfriend with me. The stranger didn't move, but his eyes followed us, like a predator watching its prey. Each step we took felt like an eternity, adrenaline coursing through our veins. As soon as we were far enough away, we turned and began to descend the rocky slope as quickly as we could. Fear gave us strength and agility we didn't know we possessed. Branches and stones cut our skin as we hurried down, but we barely felt the pain. Our only thought was to get as far away from that place and that disturbing man as possible. Darkness was falling quickly upon the forest, making our escape even more dangerous. We stumbled over roots and slid on loose stones, but we dared not stop. The survival terror propelled us forward, turning that night into one of the most terrifying experiences of our lives. The once peaceful forest had now become a shadowy, threatening labyrinth, a perfect setting for scary stories that we would never forget. The darkness of the forest enveloped us as we ran desperately, tripping over roots and branches. Fear propelled us forward, transforming the once serene forest into a backdrop for the most terrifying horror stories. Every shadow hid a potential threat, and every sound made us jump. Our ragged breathing and hurried footsteps were the soundtrack to this real-life nightmare. After what felt like an eternity, we finally spotted the distant lights of the town. The relief was momentary, as the fear of being pursued still consumed us. We constantly looked over our shoulders, fearing to see the disturbing figure emerge from the shadows. The scary stories we used to tell around campfires now seemed childish compared to the experience we had just lived through. When we finally reached the main road, we stopped to catch our breath. My girlfriend was pale, her eyes wide with terror. I held her tightly, feeling her body tremble against mine. "It's okay now," I murmured, more to reassure myself than her, but we both knew that night would leave invisible scars on our minds. On the way back home, the silence between us was heavy. We tried to process what had happened, searching for some rational explanation for the surreal encounter in the deep forest. Was that man a fugitive, a disturbed local? Or had our imaginations amplified the strangeness of the situation? Regardless of the truth, we knew that experience would join the urban legends and chilling tales people share about mysterious encounters in the forests. Upon reaching home, we locked all the doors and windows, still feeling the weight of those empty eyes watching us. We spent the night awake, huddled together, jumpy at every sound in the house. The eerie forest that we once saw as a playground for our adventures had now become a symbol of terror and the unknown. We vowed never to venture off marked trails again, carrying with us the vivid memory of that night that became one of the scariest ghost stories we had ever lived through. We discovered that reality can be far more terrifying than any fiction. On a frigid winter night in North Dakota, a solitary walk home turned into a nightmare for a 19-year-old college student. After an evening of laughter and drinks with friends, he finds himself face to face with an enigmatic figure. I was walking through the snow, leaving the house where I had spent the last few hours. The moon illuminated the North Dakota landscape. Me, a 19-year-old college student, was spending my winter break with my cousins in this isolated place. The night had been filled with drinks and laughter in the basement of a friend's house. Now, at 3 a.m., I found myself alone in that vast whiteness, trying to make my way back to my relative's house. The alcohol was still in my system, making my steps unsteady and my mind fuzzy. As I walked, I recalled the scary stories my cousins had told earlier. Tales of people who had ventured into the deep forests of the region and never returned. Chilling accounts of mysterious encounters on cold winter nights. I tried not to think about it, but these thoughts kept creeping into my head. The path was familiar. Straight behind the house, through some wooded areas, and then across an open field. The moonlight reflected off the snow, creating shadows that danced with the wind in the trees. I looked down, focusing on each step to avoid slipping on the ice hidden beneath the snow. My body froze, not only from the biting cold, but also from the shock of an unexpected encounter. The figure before me was tall and wore a ski mask that covered their entire face. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the howling wind in the surrounding trees. Trying to ease the tension, I let out a nervous laugh and gave a small wave, as if to say, "Hey, you startled me." But the stranger didn't move. They just stood there, staring at me through that impenetrable mask. The whole situation felt like something out of one of those true scary stories you hear around the campfire. Seconds dragged on like hours. My mind, still foggy from the alcohol, struggled to process what was happening. Who was this person? What were they doing alone in the eerie forest at this late hour? The horror stories my cousins had told earlier began to intertwine with the reality before me. The intense cold penetrated my clothes, but I barely felt it. All my attention was focused on that motionless figure. The moonlight cast strange shadows on the snow, giving the scene an even more sinister air. It was as if we were trapped in a surreal tableau, two strangers staring at each other in the midst of the white vastness. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't caused by the cold, but by a primal instinct of danger. A voice inside my head screamed, "You need to get out of here, now!" Without a second thought, I turned and started walking away as fast as I could towards my cousin's house. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the blood pulsing in my ears. As I hurried away, my mind slipped into panic. Each step in the deep snow felt like an eternity. Fear consumed me, fueled by the horror stories that now seemed terrifyingly real. The forest around me, once familiar, now felt like a nightmare setting. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few steps, expecting to see the stranger following me. The ski mask they wore was imprinted in my memory, an image I knew would haunt me for a long time. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of my labored breathing and the crunch of snow under my feet. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the forest to my right. The sound, likely caused by some nocturnal animal, was enough to send me into full-blown panic. Without thinking, I started running wildly. My feet sank into the snow, making each step difficult. The fear of the stranger possibly chasing me was overwhelming. As I ran, my mind spun with terrifying thoughts. What if they were following me? What if there were others like them in the forest? The stories of paranormal encounters and terrifying experiences that I had always considered mere urban legends now seemed frighteningly possible. The path to my cousin's house felt never-ending. Every shadow cast by the moonlight transformed into a threat in my fertile and terrified imagination. I could feel my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Adrenaline coursed through my body, propelling me through the snow, even as my muscles screamed with exhaustion. Finally, I spotted my cousin's house. Never had a sight brought me so much relief. I ran the last few meters as if my life depended on it, practically throwing myself at the front door. With trembling hands, I managed to unlock the door and rushed inside, quickly closing it behind me. Inside the house, the silence was deafening. My cousins had not yet returned. I leaned against the door, panting, trying to calm my breathing and my racing heart. The lights were off, and the shadows of the house seemed to move with every blink of my eyes. Slowly, the adrenaline began to wear off, and exhaustion took over my body. I dragged myself to the couch and collapsed on it. Unable to climb the stairs to the bedroom, my mind kept replaying the events of the night, trying to make sense of the surreal encounter in the eerie forest. As the hours passed, the sky began to brighten. The dawn light gradually seeped through the windows, dispelling the shadows of the night. With the arrival of day, my fears seemed less tangible, almost like a distant nightmare. Still, I couldn't shake off the sense of unease that the encounter had left. When my cousins finally returned, they found me still on the couch, with dark circles under my eyes and a distant look on my face. I tried to explain what had happened, but words seemed inadequate to describe the terror I had felt. They listened with a mix of concern and skepticism, likely attributing my story to a combination of alcohol, fatigue, and an overactive imagination. In the following days, I tried to rationalize what had occurred. Perhaps it was just another local out late at night. Maybe the alcohol and exhaustion had distorted my perception, turning a casual encounter into something more sinister. But a part of me knew that something about that night had been different, something I couldn't fully explain. That experience in the deep forests of North Dakota became one of the scary stories I would carry with me. A constant reminder that reality can sometimes be more terrifying than any horror tale. And although I try to convince myself that it was just a misunderstanding, a part of me will always wonder about the stranger with the ski mask and what could have happened if I hadn't fled that frigid night. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.